Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Wednesday night class after Sukkot. We didn't learn these halachos for a while. But if you remember before Purim, we're learning the laws of Muktzeh, basically a rabbinic to refresh everybody's memory. There's the Chachamim gave the Chachamim saw that people were very lax at the beginning of the second Bais Din in the laws of Shabbos. So they decided to make decrees to strengthen the observance of Shabbos. So first, initially, they said what's constant, the Muktzeh means you can't move. Basically, initially, the decree is you can't move anything except food issues. That's it. And then they started becoming more lax when it came to, because the people started observing Shabbos better. So therefore, nevertheless, the Chum said there's a concept of Muktzeh again, just to make a quick review of what we're learning. One is because you might come to carry it outside, or if you're able to just touch and move anything, you might come to transgress a negative commandment. Or another reason is because people don't work a whole week. There are people that don't work the whole week. So how is Shabbos different for them? So the Chum said, okay, you can't move certain issues. And if you remember, we learned Muktzeh does not mean touching. Muktzeh means moving. So until now, we learned something called Keli Shemalachtu Leheter, means a vessel, it's a broad term, vessel, whose primary use is for something permissible. That is not Muktzeh at all. Like something you're allowed to use. I mean, they gave tons of examples that we learned before, like any game that you're allowed to play, any cutlery, any furniture, things that you're allowed to play or do, things that are permissible to do are not Muktzeh. Then there's something called Keli Shemalachte Le'isser. Keli Shemalachte Le'isser means the primary purpose of that utensil is to do something forbidden. So for instance, a pen is primarily used to write. So that is partial Muktzeh. What does it mean, partial Muktzeh? You're allowed to move it for two reasons. Number one, if you need the place that's the thing is on, somebody left a pen on the dining room table, and now you need to set that area for Shabbos. So then you're allowed to pick up the pen and take it and put it where it belongs. You don't have to drop it as soon as it's off the table, whatever says, but you can pick it up and take it to the place. That applies to, and we learned last time many examples. Anything, any game that you're not allowed to play with on Shabbos, any musical instruments, electrical things, I mean, tons of things, measuring cups, anything that you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. So that becomes Keli Shemalachte Le'isser. Then the din is you're allowed to move it for two things and two things only. Either you need the place or you want to do something permissible with it. And we discussed then the simple example would this be a hammer. Its primary usage is for construction. Construction is forbidden on Shabbos. So therefore a hammer is Keli Shemalachte Le'isser. So what happens if somebody left the hammer on the kitchen table or whatever, and you need the place, or somebody left it on a bed and you need to sleep on the bed, you're allowed to pick it up and move it. Or if somebody wants to do something permissible with the hammer, for instance, they want to crack open a coconut. Okay, so you need a hammer to crack open a coconut. Or another simple example that people are shocked when you say this to them, but let's say a regular scissors is Keli Shemalachte Le'isser, because basically a scissors is made to cut, and you're not supposed to cut things in Shabbos. So what happens if somebody has a bag of food, potato chips, cookies, whatever it may be, and you're allowed to open up a bag of food for Shabbos, providing you destroy the bag by opening it. Okay. So now you have letters, and you're not allowed to rip it back because then you're going to be ripping letters, and that's the malach of erasing on Shabbos, which is forbidden. So halachically, you could take a scissors and cut open the bag Because when you cut open the bag, now you're using the scissors for something permissible, because the bag you are allowed to open on Shabbos. And in fact, it would be better in that case to use the scissors, because at least then you won't cut letters, because you have more control of what you're cutting. So technically, a scissors is a keli shemalachta le'isur. So therefore, if I need the place or I want to use the scissors for something permissible, I would be allowed to do it. For what is it not allowed to be moved? So keli shemalachta le'isur, all the cases that we learned. If somebody left their hammer outside, or they left a pen outside, and it started raining, or they're afraid it's going to get stolen, they left it on the porch, and they're afraid it's going to get stolen, then you're not allowed to carry it in. You're allowed to carry it in if you need the place. You're allowed to carry it if you want to do something permissible with it. But for the object itself, if it's going to get stolen or ruined, then you're not allowed to pick it up. Now, halacha says in that case, you can cheat a little bit. You can create a purpose of why you're going to need to use it. And then you would be allowed to do it. Okay, that's what we learned. I mean, in a nutshell, that's the dinim of what we're discussing of keli shemalachta le'isur. Now there's another form of muktzeh which is stricter. By the way, another practical case. It's not so practical today. It used to be more practical. There's something called a telephone book. A telephone book, as its name is made to look up phone numbers. So a phone book is keli shemalachta le'isur. Years ago, the older generation, we remember that they didn't have to pick up the kid in a chair. What do they call those things? Anyway, to elevate the kid, what they used to use, a booster seat. So years ago, they didn't have booster seats. They would use a telephone book. Telephone books years ago were thick, especially in the big cities, a big, thick phone book. So they would put the phone book on the chair and the kid would sit on the chair. That's called tzedach gufa. You're doing something permissible with it. Or another example, I want to go visit a friend. I need to go shalom zacha, whatever. And I don't have their address. So then I could take a phone book, not to look up their phone number, that I'm not allowed to do. But I can take the phone book to look at their address, because that's permissible. So even though a phone book is something keli shemalachta le'isur, but I'm now using it for something permissible, and then that's not a problem. Okay, so let's now go to the next concept of muktzeh. And that is what's called muktzeh machmas chisaron kis. It's a muktzeh because a person will not use it except for the purpose that it's made to use. And the thing it's made to use is forbidden on Shabbos. Okay, in other words, this is without the Rebbe passes clearly, not everybody agreed. Without the Rebbe says clearly, muktzeh machmas chisaron kis means it's muktzeh because of a loss of money, meaning it's such an expensive or so precious or delicate, or not even, we'll explain soon the concepts behind it. It is so valuable to you. You're not going to use it for anything but what it's made to use. And what it's made to use is something forbidden on Shabbos. To give you an example, a sheichet's knife, called a chalaf. A sheichet has a very special knife. Shchita is not allowed on Shabbos. Nobody will use a sheichet's knife to cut a piece of cake. It's too valuable and so intricate, the way it has to be sharp in a certain way. Nobody is going to use a sheichet's knife for anything but shchita, and shchita is forbidden on Shabbos. Or a moil's knife. Generally, bris milah is forbidden on Shabbos, unless it was the 8th day in natural birth and the day, whatever, and not delayed bris. So then the Torah says you desecrate Shabbos. But a bris milah itself is a desecration of Shabbos. So therefore, what happens if somebody has a sheichet's knife? They left it on the dining room table. Or they have a moil's knife somewhere, whatever. Then you can't move that for any reason whatsoever. unless if it's in a dangerous, somebody God forbid can get hurt. Then the law of Muktzeh doesn't apply. But you're not allowed to, and we're going to learn a lot of things that people don't even realize that it's Muktzeh. And it's total Muktzeh. You can't move it for any reason whatsoever. To give in other words, how do they define this? One of the ways they define it is, it's something that has a designated place where you always keep it. Because you don't want to ruin it. So, you don't just leave it around. Something you just leave around is usually not afraid of sudden kiss. You're afraid of not using it because it's too precious. You're going to lose money. Usually things that are precious to the person, they have a designated place where they put it. And that's usually the way it's classified. So now let's give you some examples of this, of what it would be. Okay, so we said, for instance, a doctor's scalpel. Okay, like they use in surgery or whatever. Those things are not going to use for anything but surgery. So that's Muktzeh kiss. More practical cases for everybody is like this. Nowadays, people buy clothing online and then they plan to give it back without using it. Use it and then they give it back, but that's questionable. I'm saying somebody, merchandise, they want to give back. Not food. Food is the exception. Food is not Muktzeh if the food is edible. Okay? But anything else, let's say, I'll give you an example. You buy some clothing. Okay, you buy clothing and you decided you're going to give it back. Because you want to give it back, you're not going to start playing with it and leaving it all over the place because it's going to get ruined and then you won't be able to return it. So anything that you are planning to return is totally Muktzeh on Shabbos, whether it's a dress, a shirt, a suit, a kapota, a hat, it doesn't matter. No matter, or merchandise, besides food. Anything that a person is planning to give back is Muktzeh, even though it could be a quarter. It could be 25 cents. It's not the point. I'm planning to give it back. I don't want to use it for anything, and I want to give it back. So then it becomes total Muktzeh. Or, for instance, somebody sells tablecloths from their house, or whatever it is. So then those tablecloths, you're not going to just open up and leave around because you want to sell them. So those tablecloths of your business are completely Muktzeh. That means if you, before Shabbos, somebody came and you were showing them your goods, and now Shabbos came and Hashmoshe started, Shabbos began, and the things were on the dining room table. You cannot move them off the table. They are completely Muktzeh. Why? Because it's Muktzeh, kids. You're not going to play things with it. You want to sell it. So you're not going to do anything with it. So basically it means you can't even show something. Let's say you bought a piece of clothing and then you decide you're going to give it back. And a friend comes to you on Shabbos and say, hey, look what I bought, but I'm giving it back. That is not allowed to be done because it's completely Muktzeh. Because you don't want it, you're not going to use it for anything else. Another thing is, and by the way, this depends on time and place. Okay, I'll give you certain appliances. Okay, let's give you an example of a cell phone, which is questionable because things changed. When cell phones first came out, they were very precious to everybody. Nobody used them for anything but speaking on the phone. Okay, nobody would crack open a nut with it. Nobody would even use it as a bookmark. It was just something that people didn't use for anything. That cell phone, or another example, you have a very expensive camera. You have a very expensive camera. Or another interesting thing, you have a musical instrument. I don't mean those, the recorders that little first graders play with, and the flute. If you're a musician, you have a very expensive guitar, violin, flute, saxophone, whatever. You have an expensive musical instrument. Now, you can't play music on Shabbos. So therefore, it's keli shemalachta le'isim, but it's plus. You're not going to use that violin, guitar, whatever, for anything but what it's made to use for. So therefore, that guitar, violin, whatever, is completely muktzeh on Shabbos. You cannot move it for any reason whatsoever. Even if it might break, you would not be allowed to move it. The only thing we said you'd be allowed to move it if it broke and somebody can get hurt on it, then you'd be allowed to pick it up and put it away somewhere. But otherwise, things of that nature, I'll give you an example. According to many opinions, important papers, passports, driver's license, things like that. These are very important papers. People just don't leave them around or will use them for whatever. You won't find even a person, generally speaking, will not use their license as a bookmarker. Nobody's going to use a driver's license as a bookmark to remember which page you're at, because it's too precious. Not a question financial even. It's valuable to you. Bills, you don't want to lose. Driver's license, receipts, all those types of valued papers are all completely muktzeh on Shabbos. They cannot be moved for any reason whatsoever. What did you want to ask? Hello? I don't hear you.
A towel for Shabbos.
A towel?
Yeah, like if a person goes to the mikveh and he uses the towel. Now coming back, I'm asking, a wet towel when he is used for mikveh, can we put it back in the bag and carry it home?
If there's an Erev,
yeah, okay.
And they go by the Erev, a towel is not Muktzeh. Because again, it's not something made. There's another issue. You might not be allowed to hold the towel if it's very wet because you'll squeeze it, but that's nothing to do with Muktzeh. Okay? That's a din that you might, or appliances, expensive. Somebody has a very expensive flashlight or hunting gear or something like that. So then in those cases, because they're very precious or tools of a trade or merchandise the guy has that he's not going to just use it because he wants to sell it. According to many people, by the way, we don't paskin like that, but according to many opinions, a picture hanging on the wall, which has a designated place on the wall, according to a certain opinion, is completely muktzeh on Shabbos. Because you're not going to take it off the wall and start just leaving it all over the place. Most people say it's not muktzeh, and therefore you would be allowed to show somebody a painting that you have, and you could take it off the wall. Question is, can you put it back on? But that's a separate issue. Or, for instance, somebody comes to you, want to show them a wedding album, a bar mitzvah album, whatever. So those things, halacha is they're not muktzeh, because first of all, it's not kelish mlachti le'isser, which is muktzeh machzor kiss. So the bottom line of this muktzeh machzor kiss is as follows. It's a keli with primary uses with something forbidden. But normally that keli you'd be allowed to move if you need the place or you want to do something permissible with it. If it's a very expensive thing and you're not going to use it but for what it's made to use, even if it's not expensive, but you want to return it, and therefore you're not going to use it for anything but you designated it to return, so to speak, it's completely muktzeh and there's nothing you can do about it. Okay, the next concept of muktzeh is things which are called muktzeh machmas gufay. It's muktzeh because it's muktzeh, meaning it's inherently muktzeh. Things which are defined as a non-utensil. Basically, it's defined as a non-utensil. It's hard in poskim, right? It's hard to discuss, to be clear what is a utensil, what is non-utensil, but there's a lot of things that on Shabbos the Chachamim said are not utensils, and therefore the Chachamim say it's Muktzeh, and there's nothing you could do about it. Okay, so let's discuss things which are totally Muktzeh. Now, by the way, sometimes if you designate it before Shabbos for a permanent usage, I mean, not for just that temporary time, you're using it for an extended period of time. I'll give you an example. Stones, rocks are Muktzeh on Shabbos. It's not called a keli. How do they throw stones in Meir Sha'arim on Shabbos when they're Muktzeh? It's a good question. But they say they designate the stones before Shabbos, which is also not halachically correct, because Alter Rebbe says it has to be designated permanently, not just for one Shabbos. So I'll give you an example. Somebody has a rock that they designated as a door stopper. Okay, a door stopper. So because they designated it for something usable, something permissible, it loses its muktzeh status. In other words, normally a stone is completely muktzeh. A rock is completely muktzeh. Sticks, logs, all those things are muktzeh. For instance, I'll tell you another example. Years ago, today we have, canes, proper canes. But years ago, what did people use for a cane? They cut a branch off a tree and they use that wood as a cane. So that wood is technically muktzeh. It's completely muktzeh. It's not a cane. But what's the story? Because you designated it as a walking stick, so then it's not muktzeh anymore. So if you designate a rock as to keep your door open, or you designate a rock or a stone as a paperweight, to keep papers down, so then it's not muktzeh. You unmuktzed it, so to speak. Years ago, people didn't have chairs. They would sit on big rocks. That's what they had as chairs in the yeshivas. That's what they did. So then the din was, the Gemara talks about that, if they designated the rocks as chairs, then it wasn't muktzeh, because they made it unmuktzeh by designating them before Shabbos. But otherwise, it's completely muktzeh. You can't move it for any reason at all. The same thing, I'll give you another thing. For instance, money is completely muktzeh. Money is completely muktzeh. Coins are completely muktzeh. Now, what happens if you have a gold coin? Okay, now a gold coin is a coin. So technically it's muktzeh. What happens if somebody designated it for a necklace, like women do in jewelry? So again, because you designated it before Shabbos, or on permanent basis, that you're going to be using it for a jewelry piece, it loses its muktzeh status. And then it's not muktzeh anymore in any way whatsoever. Or they say, what happens if somebody wants to designate a branch to chase away flies, a fly chaser? So they would take a branch with some leaves on it years ago, and they would wave. That's what Halacha gives an example. They would, move it around to get rid of the flies. So again, because you designated it, it's not muktzeh. It loses its muktzeh status. Sand, by the way, is muktzeh. Unless if you designated the sand and set it aside before Shabbos to use for whatever you want to use it. But by the way, while we're on this topic, you can't, kids play in the sand. Kids go to the park on Shabbos, especially the long days. And anytime you have a sandbox in the park, okay? So that sand is actually not muktzeh because they designated it, they put it away. A fly swatter is not muktzeh. You can't kill a fly with it, but it's a vessel designated to chase away flies. Chasing away flies is allowed. So it's not a vessel that's forbidden. It's not muktzeh at all. I just giving that example of a branch because a branch normally is muktzeh. But if you designate it as a fly swapper or a cane or whatever else you want to use it, then it's not an issue. But coming back to a sandbox in a park, the fact that the sand was designated to play, that's what a sandbox is. So then the sand is not muktzeh. Sand on the beach is muktzeh because it wasn't designated for anything. Now, you're still allowed to walk. I'm not talking about tznius now. I'm not talking about what you see, what you don't see. I'm just talking about the actual fact. You're allowed to walk on something muktzeh on Shabbos. Because again, as we will learn closer to the end, muktzeh is when you move it the normal way with your hands. But if you have, let's say, you walk on muktzeh, that's not a problem. You can walk on muktzeh. The only thing you can't do sometimes is like you can't play soccer on grass because inevitably when you kick the ball, you're going to be ripping up grass. And if it's for sure going to happen, so it's not an issue of grass, it's an issue of uprooting, which is called kaitzed, harvesting. You're ripping up something from the place it's connected to. But the sandbox itself is not muktzeh because it's designated. But you have to keep a few things in mind. You can't, how do kids make a sand castle or something? They take some water and they mix it into the sand, and then the sand becomes harder, so to speak, and then they build a building, right? Whatever. The problem with that is not a problem of muktzeh, it's a problem of construction. And even worse than that is kneading, K-N-E-A-D-I-N-G, lush. You are mixing water, like flour and water, you're not allowed to mix together. Same thing as with sand. Water in sand puts the kernels of sand together. So that would be forbidden, not because of muktzeh, because it's not muktzeh, it was designated for play. But if you're going to mix water into it, number one, you're doing the malach of lush, which is forbidden, biblically forbidden on Shabbos. Plus, you're doing a rabbinic thing called construction. You're building something. So even though it's not permanent, but it's still rabbinically forbidden. So these are just things that you need to keep in mind when it comes to these dinim of muktzeh. Dead animals, by the way, you have a dead fly, a dead mouse, a dead roach, or whatever you want to call it. That is completely muktzeh. So if you have a dead, let's not speak about dead mice in your house. Or I'll give you a note. This is very practical then. Somebody sets a mouse trap. Let's say they have mice in the house, so they set mouse traps. And on Shabbos, the mouse is caught. You are not allowed to throw it out. The mouse is completely muktzeh. You can kick it out. You can, with your foot, doing things like that, because muktzeh, again, like we said, you could do with your foot. But a dead bug, a dead insect, all those things are muktzeh on Shabbos. Body wastes technically would be muktzeh on Shabbos. Dead bodies, a corpse, God forbid, and this is very complicated, I'm just mentioning the concept of it. Technically, somebody passes away on Shabbos, the body is muktzeh. You're allowed to move it under certain circumstances. But the general aspect of it is, it's not a keli anymore. It's completely muktzeh. Firewood log, even, for instance, matches, for instance, some it's a machlekes if it's keli shemalachte le'iser because it's made to light a fire with. Many people, most poskim are machmeh, by the way, that wooden matches are completely muktzeh. It's worse than this keli shemalachte le'iser, which means if a woman already ben shlich and we made the bracha and she realized the matches were left out, they're not allowed to put the matches back in the drawer where it belongs, because now they became muktzeh. Okay, we're going to stop here and we're going to go now to Tanya.